Hello everyone, Professor Cruzlook here. So I wanted to make a video just overviewing the bureaucracy, the role of the bureaucracy, and why it's important for us to think about when we're learning about comparative politics. So from our previous video and from maybe your just experience with political science or government, when we think of government, when you thought about government in the past, you may have thought about elections, definitely talked about in all of your political science or civics or American history courses the importance of elections. You might learn about and think about presidents, Congress itself, maybe members of Congress. Maybe you have the image of certain members of Congress when you think of government. Political parties, of course, Supreme Courts. So those are all important and vital parts of politics, and they play an important role. They get a lot of media coverage, and they all feel pretty powerful. But something that maybe we don't think as much about in political science, or maybe you don't think about in your daily lives, is the power of the bureaucracy and the role of the bureaucracy in American government or comparative politics or even in international relations. So today, I want to answer an interesting question, for us to think about an interesting question of what is a bureaucracy and why does it matter so much in both democracies and authoritarian regimes. So, as we've talked about, at its most basic level, at its entry level, bureaucracy is a large hierarchical organization that implements public policy through roles, procedures, and specialized roles. Bureaucrats are unelected officials who carry out the decisions made by political leaders. This includes IRS agents, police officers, public school administrators, environmental regulators, immigration officers, social security administrators. The list could go on and on. Our interaction with the state is oftentimes through the bureaucracy. So, in other words, bureaucracy is really the machinery of the state. Elections choose leaders, but bureaucracy makes and implements the policy. Okay. So, modern governments are far too complex to function without administrative systems. We know from our previous discussion, legislatures pass laws, but they cannot personally enforce tax codes, inspect food security, manage border crossings, regulate financial markets, respond to natural disasters, and administer public education all at the same time. The scale of modern governance requires specialization and training. It requires professional expertise. It requires continuity beyond election cycles for the state to truly function. So, lawmakers write laws, executives can set the direction, but bureaucrats interpret, apply, and enforce those policies on a day to day basis. Without bureaucracy, modern governments would seemingly collapse. There would be no one to run the state. So, in democratic theory, bureaucracy is supposed to be neutral and professional. It is supposed to operate according to merit, not political loyalty. In the United States, this idea developed in response to really the corruption during the 19th century. Before civil service reform, government jobs were distributed through what we would call the spoils system. If you supported the winning political party, you might be rewarded with a government job. The system, though, created a lot of inefficiency, favoritism, corruption, just a bureaucracy that didn't really function. The Pendleton Act of 1883 moved the United States towards merit based hiring. The principle was straightforward. Public office should be filled on qualifications and competency, not party loyalty. Bureaucracy, in this vision, serves the law, not a political faction, not a president personally, not a party apparatus. It serves the state. But here is where we have to consider something else. Even in a roles based system, bureaucrats exercise enormous discretion. The law rarely spells out every possible situation. Think about a situation that maybe you had with the bureaucracy, and where maybe there was some ambiguity about how your interaction with state authorities went. And maybe that outcome it turned out differently from one person to the next. And this is because bureaucrats do not simply follow orders mechanically where every single interaction is spelled out. Bureaucrats can shape policy outcomes through really just everyday decisions. Political scientists refer to this as the principal agent problem. Elected officials, who are the principals, delegate authority to bureaucrats, the agents, and once that authority is delegated, monitoring becomes quite difficult. Bureaucrats gain autonomy, and autonomy is pretty powerful. So this is why bureaucracy matters so much in a democratic system. In the United States, bureaucratic power is constrained through multiple mechanisms. Courts can review administrative decisions, Congress can conduct oversight hearings, budgets can be adjusted, journalists can investigate agencies and highlight improprieties, citizens can file complaints or bring about lawsuits. We call this horizontal accountability, institutions checking on one another. So the goal then is to prevent bureaucratic abuses while preserving professional expertise. But tensions do remain. Critics argue that bureaucracy can become too large, too slow, overly insulated, or politically biased. Debates about the administrative state reflects this concerns. Some people worry that unelected officials exercise too much authority. Others argue that insulation from politics protects professionalism and stability. So, even within democracies, bureaucracy is controversial. So, let's scope that a bit into authoritarian regimes. Authoritarian regimes also rely heavily on bureaucracy. Russia has ministries. China has vast administrative agencies. There are courts, tax authorities, regulators, and local officials. The presence of bureaucracy does not distinguish democracies from authoritarian systems. What distinguishes them is purpose and accountability. In democracies, bureaucracy is intended to serve the public under the rule of law. In authoritarian systems, bureaucracy primarily serves for regime survival. So we could consider China. The Chinese Communist Party sits above the state. Senior bureaucrats are party members. Promotions depend not only on administrative performance, but also on political loyalty. Courts are subordinate to party leadership. Media cannot freely investigate government agencies. Accountability flows upwards. Um, Accountability flows upwards towards party leaders rather than outward towards citizens. So, this system produces strong administrative capacity. China can mobilize resources rapidly. It can build infrastructure quite rapidly. It can coordinate large scale policy initiatives. But it also means dissent is suppressed. Information may be filtered before reaching higher authorities. Citizens have limited power avenues to challenge the administrative decisions. So we can also think of Russia. Russia has formal elections, as we've talked about, a legislature and a constitutional court. But executive dominance shapes bureaucratic behavior. Courts rarely challenge politically sensitive cases. Regulatory agencies can selectively enforce rules. Non government organizations may be labeled as foreign agents. Bureaucratic procedures can be used to harass opposition figures while maintaining a legal facade. So, in this authoritarian context, hiring might not even be as free and fair. It might be used as for political purposes. So in democracy, hiring is primarily merit based. Oversight comes from courts, legislatures, and independent media. Citizens have avenues for complaint. Bureaucracy is constrained by law. So, in authoritarian contexts, in authoritarian regimes, by contrast, loyalty oftentimes outweighs neutrality. Oversight is internal and political rather than public and legal. Courts lack independence, media is controlled, bureaucracy protects regime authority. So the structure may look similar on paper between a democracy and an authoritarian regime, ministries, agencies, courts, but the incentives shaping bureaucratic behavior are fundamentally different, and incentives shape outcomes. So when you interact with government, whether through taxes, policing, licensing, education, or public benefits, you are not interacting with Congress, who may have passed those laws to create those agencies. Instead, you're interacting directly with the president. You're interacting with bureaucrats. The structure of bureaucracy determines how fair procedures are, how consistently roles are applied, whether citizens have recourse when something goes wrong, whether media can expose misconduct, or whether dissent is tolerated. So, bureaucracy is not just paperwork, it is the operational form of state powered. So let's leave with something interesting to think about. We've been comparing and thinking about legislatures and executives and now bureaucracies in authoritarian regimes versus democratic regimes. So this is just another layer for us to compare in a comparative politics course of how the bureaucracy functions in one government system versus another. Thank you.